Welcome to the Equipping Leaders Podcast Leader Study Series. I'm Natasha, a leader development professional and overall leadership enthusiast.
And I'm Corey, a program manager and an emerging people leader, thus a leadership enthusiast.
We are doing a leader study of the TV show Z Nation, deconstructing the leaders, decisions, and team dynamics of the characters on the show to look at how leadership is all around us. And even if we're not in a position of leadership, we can still demonstrate it in our actions, responses, and opportunities.
Z Nation aired from 2014 to 2018, but if you haven't seen it yet, there will be spoilers in these episodes. Today, we're talking about Season 4, specifically the value of reflection, tough decisions, letting people be who they need to be, and the importance of direct communication. Let's jump in.
So we are coming to the end of Season 4, and we're in an episode where the team gets to return to something that they previously were a part of. So when there were the No Mercy episodes at the beginning of Season 3, now they're returning to Mercy Labs. So we're in Season 4, Episode 11, Return to Mercy Labs. What were some of your takeaways?
I think you have two different sort of storylines going on in this episode where you have Kaya and Citizen Z deciding if that area is still safe, if it's right for them. You know, they've got a baby now, if that's the right place for them to live and grow up, but they're also still trying to reach out and make contact with Operation Bite Mark. And so I thought that was pretty cool because, again, that was co-leadership of them trying to make that decision for that little micro team, which is the baby that they have now. So that was one of the big ones for me at first. And then I guess I want to hear your things, because then my next one isn't until like the very end of the episode. I just got the bread. I don't know if you got any meat in the middle.
So as they're walking through the area and they're seeing some of the leftover carnage from when they were there last and had to launch this assault on the man, what I really liked was these aspects of reflection that they were going through, where it was really like, remember this, but also like, look how far we've come. Like, think about how things are so different. And I love that for a bunch of reasons, mainly that we don't often get the opportunity as leaders, as people in general, we don't often get the opportunity to reflect. And sometimes we're just confronted with it. Like, you have to go back to a place where you haven't worked in a long time, or you run into someone from the past and it brings up all this stuff. And I think that if we can make time for reflection along the way, that definitely helps us approach those things better. It helps us to be active versus reactive in different situations.
Yeah, that's, I think it's also interesting because, I've made the joke many times, or the observation, I guess, really, that they often, they go in to help and they don't leave that place better than they found it. And I think them looking around at some of the destruction that they've left, again, that being a slightly different case because it was a legitimate battle, it's a really great point. And I think it was interesting the way you could see them all having that own little time to internally reflect on it. And they were all doing that sort of as a group, but it wasn't like a group exercise. Yeah, that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, and I really liked everything you said there, and especially that piece of it impacted them differently, but like going through and seeing this is what we had to do at this time because of what the situation was. But now I know more. I would maybe do something differently. Not that they needed to, but it's that whole like, look at what we did here, right? Look at that carnage that we left here. But also at the time, like you said, it was completely necessary. It was a battle. They were under attack from the man and his mercy-proof zombies. But then at the same time, to really, as you grow and as you evolve and you learn more things and you have more inputs, it really does put you in that place of, would I do it that way again? And probably not. But also, what I liked is that, like, even Doc, when he was like reflecting, some of them are like Warren, some of them are thinking about kind of the aspects that we're talking about. And then other people like Doc are thinking about kind of like the more badass elements, right? Where they're like, when he was doing that, like, let's rock and roll or whatever before like the physical battle. So it's also interesting too, where the things that remind people the same experience represented these very different things to these people. And I think that's another element that we need to remember as leaders, where it's like, it may have meant something to you, it may have meant nothing to you, but that doesn't mean that that's what it meant to the next person. So also making the space for that.
Yeah, especially like if you look at somebody like 10K, right, who had like a lot of emotional ups and downs that were sort of started at the Mercy Labs.
Mhm.
And you know, versus like you said, like Doc, who had like a really good time there. I think that's the other thing too, is like it's important to remember same situation, people had different outcomes, takeaways, and things for that. So I think as leaders, giving people that time to um, digest and unpack, when you're revisiting those places, I think that's something that is often overlooked. And I think it's important too, especially I think about, um, you know, especially within an organization. Sometimes you'll start out in an office or a group or a division or something like that. It's where you first got hired. Um, and then, that person moves on, they come up as a leader. Sometimes people stay in that same office or group, and then you come back as a leader. It takes some time because you have to reintroduce yourself to those people, not as the new employee, but maybe as the person that's here to help make decisions. And so that's something too that I think a little bit abstract from what we're talking about now, but it just sort of triggered the thought in my mind.
I love that. Yes, yeah, you're making me think about that a lot too. There was another piece, especially around the 10K piece, where he's talking to Doc. And I thought this was such a moment between teammates. It shows those leadership pieces of Doc, but where 10K, and I'm just looking at my note here, where 10K and Doc, they're talking about hope. Like, do you think there's any hope for humanity? And Doc gives the most honest answer. But I think that something that leaders feel like they need to do is they're like, I always need to be optimistic, or I always need to instill hope. Or they take the other thing where it's like everything is doom and gloom and it's just impossible. But what I think is so interesting about his answer to 10K was that it walked that line between both. And he said, my head says humanity is screwed, that we're not going to come back from this. He says, but my heart has hope. And I think that that's also, it's so honest, because there's nothing like we know hope is not a course of action, but he wasn't making it out that way. He was just like, intellectually, I'm looking around and I'm surveilling, and this is what I'm seeing, and it's not good. But there's something in me, my gut, my instinct, my heart, whatever it is that you want to say, that it's like, but we can overcome this, right? We will get through this. And I think that that's what leaders need to instill, no matter what the time is. So if it's a tough time, absolutely. But even in good times, acknowledging that it's like, there are still challenges, or there are still these other things, and I'm not going to diminish that just because times are good. I can still acknowledge that, but say, hey, we are still able to move forward. So that really stuck to me. I think I actually journaled about it too, because it was one of those things where it's like, do I do that enough? Where it's like, let me tell you about reality, because part of a leader's job is to define reality for people, but also am I then giving that hope that's not too out of touch?
Yeah, I think there's a scale, you know what I mean, that you associate with that hope too. Because you know what I mean, there's like that, there's those things where you're allowed to dream big, but then, like you said, that's a really great point. So yeah, that was excuse me. I think what's also really interesting here is um the team's going through all of this, and Warren, as we know, is kind of, she's following sort of those visions, right? That like that I don't want to say brainwashing, I think that's what it is, but like the programming that was instilled in her from Zona to get into the Mercy Lab thing. So she sees some of that stuff, but I think I think kind of like a lot of leaders, she's has this mission that she's focused on. She doesn't get that time to like unpack and like be reflective because she's still continuing on this other thing. So the rest of the team is doing that, and she's sort of stunted from being able to do that because she's still continuing on this other thing, right? She's not necessarily stopping the team from doing it, but she's not able to do it the whole way herself. And again, not like they're going through all of like the stages of the grief cycle or anything in these 15 minutes, but I do think that there's value in taking the time to be reflective there. And she's not, right? 'Cause she gets something else to do. And I think that that's sometimes as leaders, you don't always get um the time to do what's best for you because you got to do what's best for the group and the mission. And so I think that that's an interesting little piece there. You know what I mean? That's tucked in. She's sort of immediately off looking for another one of those like biosuits because again, this is the one with the lab that's got the like mushroom zombies in it. So yeah, I think that's really one of the things that also stuck out to me was her just drive towards that mission.
And I think you bring up a really excellent point there where when people become leaders, it becomes so much about leading others and making sure they're taken care of if you're a good leader. It becomes so much about other people helping their development and all that we do put ourselves on the back burner. And there are definitely seasons where that needs to happen. Absolutely. And there's this aspect of leader self-care that should be ongoing. But in this episode, you're right. This is where we see Warren also become like fully like Manchurian candidate. Like I'm doing these things and I don't know why I'm doing these things. So it's almost like this other programming has taken over and she's just following these steps. She knows these codes and all this stuff. She's not worried about zombies or anything else. She just has this focus. But yeah, I think that kind of going back to that previous piece of that leader self-care where, you can't pour from an empty cup. So you have to make sure you're also doing that stuff because if you stunt yourself in your growth and in your reflection and in moving forward, you're stunting your entire team. But like I said, there are definitely seasons where sometimes it is just about other people, but that can't be the whole year, right? That can't be the whole cycle.
Yeah, and then it's true. Yeah, just a lot to think about there. But so one of the other things that they find as they're going through this lab, is they find like this child that's like in, I'm gonna say amber, or like it's like a Star Wars, like what's Han Solo in? Not kryptonite. Oh God, a terrible nerd. But the you have just like he's in suspended animation, we'll call it, right? In some sort of, it's like an amber goo, and they think it's just like a preserved sort of specimen, if you will. And then they realize that he's actually in that state of like suspended animation where he's sort of in a limbo state. And it's funny because you have the team that's deciding like what's the best course of action. Do we leave this computer program running for that suspended animation point, or is it like better to shut those computers down, right? Like what's the right way about doing that sort of a thing? And there's sort of a debate and an argument amongst the team, and it's a very polarizing, it's either a yes or a no, right? It's a very black and white, the outcome of the decision. There's no middle of the road thing. And I think it was interesting because you had everyone's voice sort of being equal in this conversation, and it was I think like they handled it well, right? Obviously got a little heated and emotional, but I thought that was like a far more realistic look at most of the problems that I've encountered, where it's hard to keep you try to stay objective and just think like what's best for the group, what's best for the business, what's best for anything. But in a lot of these cases, it's something that's slightly more like personal, that you have like very strong personal viewpoints on. And I think in a lot of the business decision things that are happening with programs within organizations and companies now, you do have an emotional background to it. So it's really hard to separate that. And I think that it's not always the best idea to separate what your like your moral compass is telling you from like what a corporate moral compass is. So I think like they walked a fine line there, and I thought that was pretty interesting to see.
I think the debate also, I think it was a little bit more than just, do we leave this on to support this kid, or do we divert the energy that we need to
Yes.
communicate with Citizen Z? And so, but in communicating with Citizen Z, we are taking the power away from this. We are, in fact, turning this off. And what was so interesting too was Sergeant, she said, so like this was essentially me, right? Like I was in this place. If someone hadn't come along and found me and saved me, I wouldn't be here right now. So I think it kind of goes to also what you're saying with the whole, like, what is it that I feel in this situation? And this is where people should definitely use their voice. That perspective, the sergeant's perspective was not in the room. Nobody was thinking like that because they didn't have that experience, but she did. And so in voicing that, she also made that conversation definitely more nuanced, but also more robust. And so I think that that's a big thing where it's like, there are these two decisions, both equally not fun, like equally not great. We either leave this running forever, and then this kid's in this animated state forever. And you know, his parents aren't around. So then what? He's just, it's weird that way. But then the alternative is, do we shut it off to divert the power to us for something that we need to move forward? And I think also the way that we word things sometimes can be we need to be very careful. I'm not wild about the phrase words have meaning, because of course they do. That's why we use them. But I think that sometimes it's like we use certain words where it's like, oh, or do we do this because it seems more selfish, but it's like over here. And it's like, yeah, but when we use certain words, we're giving ourselves an excuse for not doing the right thing or for doing something. So, yeah. So in this, though, one of the pieces that I really loved about as they're making this decision, which the decision that they made was to divert the power so that they could communicate with Citizen Z and Kaya. And the sergeant, she said she could do it, right? She said she could do it. It was an order that she was given from Lieutenant Warren, and she was going to go do it. And then she just couldn't, like emotionally, she just couldn't do it. But then Warren, as the leader, right? Like, again, great leadership quality, sees how difficult it is for her and steps in and does it. And I think that there are a lot of times when we need to let people just do their jobs, right? We need to let people be autonomous and, you know, just absolutely crush it in their areas of strengths. But I think there's also a time when, I mean, leaders are essentially paid more and they have higher visibility and they have more scope because they have to make decisions. And so her stepping in like that was just another phenomenal leadership moment where it was like, this is too much for this person. This isn't a regular thing, part of their regular job that they normally have to do. It's not about her not being able to do her job, but it is about like, this is too much for her, but it needs to be done. So I'll just step in and do it.
Yeah, that piece too. And then the other thing I was going to circle back on was, you know, I thought Murphy was very interesting in like his view or like how he was arguing this, which I think the Murphy that we knew in season 1 would have been like, let's get on the radio, let's get on the comms, versus the Murphy from where he's grown through his, you know, life and experience now, that you have the complete opposite viewpoint, right? And so I think that that was something that's very interesting to me, is that the team had been together long enough that they are seeing value changes and shifts within each other. And I think that's funny too, because I've worked with some folks that I've worked for a really long time. And sometimes, you know, I don't know if there's any studies or, you know, anything that goes against it, but it or goes along with it. But it's like, I almost feel like you need to reform the team sometimes, like internally, because what I normally would think of as being something as a cohesive team where I kind of know what Murphy's going to say, right? Or what he's going to do. If all of a sudden we're doing the complete opposite of that, that's a whole paradigm shift, right? It's essentially a new person now. So we need to reform and see what things look like. So I thought it was pretty interesting.
I completely agree. And what I love too about this team is that they do let people change.
Yeah.
And whether it was Hector, formerly a Scorpion, or Murphy, they don't hold them to an outdated version of themselves. And I think that that is something that humans have such a hard time doing in general. And yeah, and on a team, somebody can change or hold a different mindset or hold a different perspective. And so it's like, how does this contribute to the team now, right? Like, which tool on this Swiss Army knife are they effective as now versus maybe what they were effective as before? Because yeah, the experiences that people have as they walk through different things. I know that like recently I had just a mindset shift at work where, I mean, I'm not like completely, it's not quite a Murphy level shift, but at the same time, it's one of those things where it is definitely a new approach to how I want to talk about and work with the program that I have. And so even with that, it's been interesting to kind of talk about that with like my supervisor and such, who's, you know, also like, I love this, because before we tended to be a little bit more siloed and thinking from a little bit more of a people experience thing, when I'm like, what if we just thought about it from one of the other business units within the company, right? Instead of thinking about it. Now, we'll of course still think about people experience things, but what if we also, why can't that be a beautiful Venn diagram with what is the culture of these other pieces of the business? So even that, and who knows how I'll evolve and emerge with that, right? So I think that that's something really important, is that we can't hold people to an outdated version of themselves. We need to let them be who they are now and give them that space to change. Because if they had just shut Murphy down and been like, oh, well, 3 years ago, you would have said this. Well, thank goodness I'm not that person anymore, right? Like just move on.
Yeah, but those were the big things that I got.
Yeah, this was such an interesting episode because there were so many elements of the team needing to kind of walk through something and the leader being a little bit absent, but then when things got really dicey, the leader jumped in and helped out. Those elements of reflection and all of that. So yeah, this is probably it's probably my favorite episode of season 4.
Yeah.
So now they're in this place where they're still trying to find out more about this Black Rainbow. In diverting that power, they got a little more information from Kaya and Citizen Z. And they find out that they need to find the president and get his thumbprint. And that takes us into the next episode, which is Mount Weather. So they are now again on the move, ready to go and find the president to get his or her thumbprint. So what were some of your takeaways from this episode?
I think one of the first big ones that I had was the fact that the president's sort of right, that still exists, or that they don't know if it still exists, but so they arrive at that Mount Weather sort of bunker, and they've got to get in, and there's like these discussions sort of about, they're remembering that they used to have a president, this formalized government thing, and it's sort of this like campy joke haha thing, but then as they start to get into that bunker and they run into those 2 like Secret Service agents, I think it's interesting the way that Sarge sort of like flips that switch and is like, she's just fully immersed back into sort of that environment and acting in that way. And so I think that's kind of cool that, you know, she traveled so far away from that and then snaps back into it. And that's like not like a military thing. I'm just saying it's like people want that structure, right? They want that normalcy, and they're like willing to accept that. And the moment that sort of came back in a glimmer, she was back in line with that. So I don't know. I thought that was really interesting.
I think that, yeah, the things that made us feel like we belong or made us feel safe or anything like that we allow those things to become the most ingrained. And so that was something, because I believe it was either in this episode or maybe it was in the previous episode, but 10K asks her, did you like being a Marine? And she says, I'll always be a Marine. Right. And so there's just that piece where it's like, there's sometimes these groups that we belong to, that we identify with, that just impact us in a way that other things haven't. So we will attach ourselves to them for a long time. So yeah, when she was in a position where it was like, that's who I am, like, that's how she identifies. She identifies as a Marine. And now was the opportunity to demonstrate those Marine-like qualities. And she was able to step back into it easily.
So that part was interesting. And then as they sort of go through and they meet the current president, I forget who she is, right? But she's like the undersecretary of agriculture or something, right? But it's that continuity of government, chain of command, right? It keeps going down and down and down. And what I think is so interesting is it was her and two other people essentially were the last humans left in that bunker. Everyone else was sort of a zombie. And Doc and Murphy do some funny haha political jokes, and they find that conference room with some like senators or something in it. And but what I thought was so interesting was she, the president, she just sort of acted like a president. You know what I mean? Like she presented herself in a way that looks right to these people, and they'd gotten into this bunker, this whole thing, but she tried to be like consistent, and she tried to be like stoic almost. And I thought that was kind of cool. You know what I mean? Like she was sort of in that role, but wasn't in that role. And I just thought that was really interesting, like from a leadership style of like, this is what these people need, right? They need to see this sort of like representation of this organization still exists. She was pushing that forward, even though there's kind of nobody left to be accountable to that.
I love that, because I am very into the idea of being an authentic leader. And I don't believe in authenticity no matter what. And so I love how you said that, because what do these people need from me? She wasn't changing her personality, but it was like they needed somebody who was calm and consistent. And she was like, I can show up like that. That is, that will essentially communicate my authority in another way, which again is what people need, especially from a position like that. So that's a really great point. I hadn't even thought about that.
Yeah. And it was just sort of like, I was trying to put myself in her shoes, right? There's no more Congress, there's no more military, there's no more anything, right? So I'm supposedly the sort of the highest level of leader in the land, right? That you can be. I have none of these things. And she was very transparent about that. But it wasn't a big deal. She was still this leader, right? She still had a job to do because she believed in the concept of the mission. So, and that's, I think I'm also a bit of a bleeding heart patriot type person, right? Where like America will figure it out no matter what. So, I think that comes into play. But yeah, I thought that was really interesting. And then, the other piece of that was with Warren and them talking about Black Rainbow, right? Which is supposedly this super secret classified thing. She like shares that information with them, but is sort of like reserved. And I thought that was like, that was interesting, right? She was like, I don't necessarily trust these people, but she wasn't willing to make that call to say like, to get rid of them, right? Kick them out or whatever. She shared more information with them to explain what it was. So,
Yeah, I think they had the right keywords too. They knew Dr. Teller.
yeah.
They even knew what Black Rainbow, like that it was a thing. Yeah. I think
I like to, oh, sorry, no. I also like the Easter egg of the jelly beans on the desk because I'm a big Ronald Reagan fan. So
yeah, I think she even says like from the 80s. Yeah. There's also a point too, and I think this is so important for leaders where they overestimate the influence that they have, or they feel like they have people fully bought in, and people are still people, and they could be a wild card, but we can never truly know the intentions or the heart of someone else. Even if we think that they're telling us everything, even if they say they're telling us everything, something can happen. The way something is said, something, other inputs that can change how they feel. So there is a point when the president and the Secret Service folks have decided that Warren and her team are not viable to helping them further their mission. So they're going to, take them out. But the president says something to Sergeant Lilly and, is basically like, hey, this is a direct order. So Lilly follows it. And then later, the president says, vote with your weapon, about this outcome. And Lilly did something that nobody was expecting, right? So people thought she had betrayed the team, was now on the side of the president, was going to kill the team and all of that. But it was just interesting because I think that, again, you can never truly know the people around you. And it's not to be like distrustful, but if you push people too hard and too far, they have no other choice but to be like, this is out of integrity with who I am. This is not a values match. So I'm going to leave this company. I'm going to leave this situation. And hopefully they don't destroy anything in their path on the way to exiting, but you never know. So I think that that's another really important thing for leaders to keep in mind, is that you can't push people too hard or too far away from the things that they hold to be valuable.
Yeah, that's the other thing. I think, circling back again, Operation Bite Mark wants to stop Black Rainbow, right? They do not want Black Rainbow to take place. The president wants Black Rainbow to take place, but during the course of those conversations, when they were developing that relationship, they were being so abstract with their communication. Neither of them were aware that the other one had the complete opposite viewpoint of them. So they built this sort of trust and understanding on this abstract interpretation. And then when it came to that rubber meets the road, so they went down deeper in to go find the original president's thumbprints, who was a zombie, so they could get the thumbprints to, in the current president's mind, activate Black Rainbow, and in Bite Mark's mind, deactivate Black Rainbow. They were all copacetic, working together, smooth running team. And then, they kind of had that realization, and then all the stuff that you just mentioned was triggered. But again, talking about being clear and upfront with like what your goals and your objectives are as a leader, boy, is that a great illustration of why that's important.
That is so smart, Corey, because yeah, absolutely. Abstract communications, people either do it because they don't want to give away too much information, or they do it because they don't want to micromanage other people. But in doing that, there is a complete lack of clarity. So it's like, yeah, do you want me to get to the server? Do you want me to brick the server? And they're like, the server. And you're like, okay. So yeah, you're right. That direct and clear communication. And also, yeah, what are the goals? Like, what is the end thing that we're going for? Oh, if we're not going for the same thing, then this isn't going to work. Not going to destroy you, but at the same time, I'm going to go work on furthering us versus hindering us by teaming up with you.
Yeah.
So so now we're coming to the end of this season, and we have gotten these clues that Black Rainbow is obviously not great. And then, there's all this talk about a reset. And now we get to the last episode of the season, the Black Rainbow. And this is where also Warren kind of learns that all of these things that she's been programmed for, she is the reset. She has been setting these things in motion. And we've had suspicions along the way and all of that. But this is where it's like, oh no, this is it. You're the problem. And so there's working through that. We have a lot of the characters on the show, I think in this episode, they stepped up in really different and unique ways that show their evolution so far. But I'll pass it over to you. What were some of your main takeaways from this episode?
Um, I, again, I think it's amazing how much trust the team has in Warren, because there's that point where they are sitting in DC somewhere near the National Monument or something like that, and they're waiting for that almost Indiana Jones level. The sun will fall on an exact spot and highlight and light up. So it's a very old timey adventure story thing. Um, and the team's just there chilling and they're okay with it, right? Do they necessarily believe in it? Absolutely not. I don't think any of them do, but they believe in Warren, right? So they're going to stick around. And I think that is so tremendously powerful, right? Because it's like they're following that human, and that's, but because they believe in her. And that was one of the big things I saw there. And like you had said, and we talked, it's a dead horse at this point, but as they're moving through, they're going to find this location for the Black Rainbow thing. They're like, it's that, like you had said, they're really moving effectively and efficiently. They're communicating, they're making self-sacrifices, those little micro decisions. It's just like, it was such an interesting flow of, they knew that Warren was going to do her own thing, right? She was sort of on that autopilot mode. They tried to clear the path, right? Or prevent whatever they'd gone through. So it's either they're putting up a wall behind her so that there was nothing going to get her in the back, as it were, and they're trying to clear the road in front of her. So I just thought that was really cool. Really, really cool.
And we even see, and we've seen it in pieces more throughout this whole season, but Murphy being a great team member, being a great advocate for the other people on his team, and really being concerned about what was going on with Warren and even some of the other people. We see him coming together, getting closer with Doc. And so we see this really, what I think is a cool, I'm a Murphy sympathizer though, so
Yep.
we see this but really cool evolution, because in the past he would not have cared as deeply or as actively as he did, I think, in this episode. And so again, I think it goes back to what you said, where it's like he has also been actively arguing against whatever this is the whole time, but still going along with it because he believes in Warren and he is still vested in her success, knowing that she's been vested in his and theirs this whole time too. So yeah, I thought that there were just he had some cool moments there where he really, came to her aid. And like when she's going out to get onto the drone or to load up the drone or whatever, and there's that other guy there who he along the way has kind of been in the background. I think his name is Mr. Sunshine, but he's the guy who he was trying to upload things into like NORAD about Black Rainbow, and he knew all these different things. And so then Murphy goes head to head with this person, which, if again, kind of going back to what we were saying earlier, where we have to let people change, because season 1 Murphy was never going to physically fight someone on anybody else's behalf, sometimes not even his own. And so now it's just this really cool evolution. So there we go. I'm back to being a super Murphy sympathizer. Season 3, I got off track. Season 4, we're back.
No, Murphy was he was absolutely willing and ready to sacrifice himself to protect Warren, right? Like full in, full stop. And that was, I think, interesting too, because up until this point as well, I can't necessarily say that 10K and Sarge were as involved, because they both were apart and they've been there the whole storyline, but Murphy definitely has like a deeper understanding, especially because of some of the stuff that he had done with like when he had the ability to read people's minds, when he would, that kind of thing. He's got a little bit more knowledge, and all the time that he spent at Zona, that kind of thing. I think it was one of those points where Warren seemed a little crazy just following that autopilot thing, and Murphy also kind of thought she was a little crazy, right? I'm putting my own opinion on it, but the moment that all of that came together, everything that she was doing, everything that she was saying, this whole concept was all made very, very real. And I think that was like, Murphy was able to identify that and realize how important it was and go after it. And I thought that was pretty neat too.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
Good season.
It was
solid
an excellent season. And so, yeah, so now Warren flies off in this drone and the team's kind of like standing there, kind of what's next? Right.